It'll save a kid. Well, maybe, okay, but what is the overall impact public health? Isn't this about public health? So like with measles, for just as a random example, about 400 people a year died of measles in the US in the late 50s, early 60s before the first measles vaccine in 1963. The measles mortality rate had declined by over 98% between 1900 and the introduction of the vaccine. So obviously, I know one thing that didn't cause that reduction, the vaccine, because there was none, okay?
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Okay, guys, we're diving in here. We got a good one today, a doozy of a conversation with a hero of mine. Aaron Siri has been fighting the good fight, standing in the gap he's been a voice for the voiceless here when it comes to just standing in the gap on a legal side of things. And really, we just saw him last night in the Inconvenient Study, a new documentary coming out. And very well done documentary. If you haven't seen that documentary, I would recommend supporting that film, getting that film out and sharing it. Aaron, thanks for sitting down with me today.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
I want to open up and ask you, are you a medical doctor and immunologist?
Or a vaccinologist?
Yes.
No.
Dude, that was the most profound response, mic drop response right there. I mean, well done, well said.
Yeah, Senator Blumenthal. Yeah, he loves me.
Yeah. It was great.
Yeah.
You responded. They asked you, are you a medical doctor, immunologist, or biologist? And you said no.
Right.
But I depose them regularly, including the world's leading ones. And I have to make my claims based on actual evidence and facts, not on titles.
Right. It's true.
Well said. Well, I'm excited to be talking to you because obviously this is such a burden that we carry. There's a mountain of evidence that the unvaccinated are healthier. We have, mounting evidence. It's been there. I've been in this fight for a long time. And my father before me, and we've been in this standing the gap here. And so I want to get your perspective on this because, vaccinations are at the forefront of this conversation, and in this country, and the soil for truth is rich right now, and the tides are turning. Are you seeing that now?
Absolutely. I would say that from my decade-long perspective of litigating, fighting around civil and individual rights when it comes to mandated medicine, mostly vaccines, the tide has been turning for many years, and people are more and more in different pockets and in different ways starting to understand that we need to treat these things as products, vaccines as products, not as items of worship. And that means, we should be able to ask questions. We should be able to properly, to actually assess what are they relied upon to license them? What's post-licensure safety look like? What is the actual benefit? What's the actual risk? Questions that were seemed, 8 years ago, we just deem you immediately a heretic.
Yes. So what you're saying is we should be allowed to ask questions, right?
I know.
Right.
Yes.
So
think for ourselves.
Right. So tell me about the vaccine court systems. Do you have experience going against the vaccine courts?
Yeah. I mean, there's about 20 folks in my firm who just represent people injured by a vaccine, but you can't sue the pharmaceutical companies. You can sue, and I believe this is what you're referring to, you sue HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, which is the federal department in which all of our federal health agencies are located. So that's where the CDC is, the FDA, and the NIH. So that's who you quote unquote sue if you're injured, but you don't get like a judge that's, appointed by the Senate. You get something called a special master, and it's a program where you get no discovery as of right. Your hands are kind of tied behind, you're really tied behind your back. And a lot of times what drives the decisions is often a policy relating to try to make sure vaccines are still viewed as safe and effective. And so, yes, we have plenty of folks who represent individuals who are injured, who, seek compensation. That program, which has paid out over $5 billion since 1986, when pharmaceutical companies got this immunity for the injuries that caused by their childhood vaccine products. But separately, most of the lawsuits that I work on are vaccine policy related. So they seek to restore the individual and civil right to choose not to get these products. You want to get a vaccine? Get as many as you want. That's freedom. You want to wear 60 masks? You want to live in your basement? Do stay-at-home order? This is America. You have the right to do that. I support your right to do it. On the same token, nobody should compelled ever to get these products. You should be able to make 100%. That decision freely.
I would say not compelled, but coerced. I feel like that's what we're at right now. And coercion, I think, is it's a heavy word. And I think there's, what do we see during COVID is that so many people were coerced. They were given an ultimatum: you have a job or get vaccinated, or get vaccinated or lose your job. And so I think that's what we, I just got off the phone with a lady up in Canada that she lost everything because she refused the vaccine. How many people did that happen in the States here? But, going back to the courts and the vaccine courts and suing HHS, you said there's not a judge in these systems. And so I'm assuming there's no jury either. And, is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole program violates the Constitution by not providing a jury of your peers. I think it's absolutely unconstitutional in that regard.
If there's a jury, then there would be more witnesses here to witness this, and they're trying to protect this $1 trillion industry. And so what percentage? And I've heard like less than the percent of vaccine injuries make it to the court system. But walk us through how one would get in to sue HSS and the steps that would lead up to that.
Sure. Leading up to, if I can give a little bit of a longer version, I'll give the backdrop to it. Leading up to 1986, there were only 3 routine vaccines in the United States. That's it: MMR, DTP, and OPV. A child following the CDC schedule in 1986, by 1 year of age, got 3 injections. A child following it today gets 29. But let's put that aside. Those 3 vaccines, caused so much harm and injury that every manufacturer making them went out of business, except for one was left for pertussis vaccine, one for the measles, and one for the polio vaccine, down from 6 or 3 manufacturers to 1. Now, normally, when a product causes injury, when a plane is falling out of the sky, when your gas tank's blowing up, when your floorboards are causing you cancer because they're releasing some kind of toxic, you name it, the company making the product needs to make a better and safer product. And they have an economic self-interest to do it. They want to make money. So they will make a better, safer product. Congress, in its wisdom, did something with vaccines that does not exist for any other product in this country. Okay. It said, you know what? You don't need to make your vaccine safer. Instead, we're going to make it so that no matter how many children they kill, no matter how many children they maim or harm, we're going to make it so that parents of those children cannot sue you to claim that those vaccines could have been made safer. We're going to give you financial immunity, absolute blanket financial immunity for those harms in a law called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. That law upended the economic interests I just talked about. Now, Congress recognized, well, we got to give people some path to get some kind of compensation. And so it created what it claimed was a more efficient way to get folks who are injured by vaccines compensation by creating the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. And so there was supposed to be a trade-off. And the trade-off was supposed to be, we're going to cap the damages for death at $250,000. We're going to cap damages for pain and suffering at $250,000. Still capped to those amounts today. And pain and suffering, that's, if you're in pain for the rest of your life because you have some neuropathy from a vaccine, that's the most you're going to get. Okay. We're going to make it so that, unlike the way you would normally prove a harm in a drug case, because you can just do drug pharma companies for drug injuries, which is discovery. We get documents from inside the company. We get to depose the scientists in that company. We're not going to let you do any of that. Okay. And we're going to, in many other ways, I don't want to bore your audience, limit the normal ways that you would get a win for your injury in regular court. And we're going to make it a better, speedy process. But the reality is that it hasn't become better and speedy. You're better off at almost every vaccine injury claim, in my opinion, going to just being able to have a regular go to regular court and bring a claim that you could have said the product could have been made safer. You failed to warn me of it. Here's why. If you're injured by a vaccine, you can call our firm, right? Let's just go through a simple injury. Let's just say you're a truck driver. You get a shot in the arm. It causes your bursa to explode. You now can't drive trucks. You got a family to feed. You need compensation now to feed your family. Right. You call our firm, right? Unless you've gotten surgery, you've been hospitalized. We have to say to you, okay, but we got to wait 6 months to make sure that you still have the injury. Even if you're like, can't move your arm, you're immobilized. Okay. 6 months pass. Now we have to go collect typically 3 years of your medical records, which takes time to do. Because while we don't get discovery, they get all of the medical records, so they can start picking and poking and prodding and looking for anything they can. It's a one-sided game. It's the most unfair balance you could ever imagine. So now it takes us a while to collect those medical records. Then when we file
they can just
them,
drag their feet.
Well, I mean, hospitals often don't like getting lawyers' letters asking for medical records.
Right.
Then when we get all that, we file the petition finally. Now, in almost any other court case that I do, and we do, I got 50 folks that do vaccine work, but we also have over 50 folks that do plaintiff class actions. We do all kinds of other legal work. There's no case that we file where the other side gets more than 30, 60, maybe 90 days. When you file a petition, the DOJ will often get 9 months to a year to even respond. So here you got a guy, he can't work, his bursa's exploded. It's about 2 years in. He's finally getting a response to the DOJ. Absolutely desperate at this point to feed his family. At that point, you think, finally, right, we can get him compensation. That's where the DOJ just starts playing their games. Now they go through, various, including pretending they're really going to negotiate a good offer to make a settlement. They never really do. The settlement proposals almost never properly compensate these individuals so they can actually go on and have the finances they need to live their lives given the injuries they've sustained. And that process goes on for a while. Either they're going to potentially they'll challenge entitlements, or they'll challenge the amount, or they won't negotiate in good faith. And by the time we get down the road, you've got somebody who's 2.5 years in, and they're just desperate. And oftentimes, unfortunately, they'll take an amount that is well below what they should be receiving, and certainly often, in my opinion, far below what they would have gotten. They could just have gone to court to begin with and got a jury of their peers in a normal process with actual discovery. So that is the universe in which we live in. I mean, I'll end it by one example. Infants that die directly after vaccination, which happens. Obviously, most babies don't die after vaccination, thank God, but some do. We've had situations where a totally healthy baby has a grand mal seizure within 10 minutes, is rushed to the emergency room and is dead within 12 hours. No other explanation other than stuff that no serious objective scientist or doctor would actually put forth, but you will see put forth in this program. But yet you can't almost ever get compensation for babies that die. It's really not driven, in my opinion, by the facts or the law. It's driven by policy. It's because they don't want to create vaccine hesitancy, and they're worried that dead babies that die from vaccines, create vaccine hesitancy. And the problem is, if you won't accept and you don't recognize that some babies do die from these products, then you'll never improve them. You'll never make them better. The companies have no financial incentive to do it. So who's left? HHS. Right. But here they are, totally conflicted, because they're literally fighting against these claims. And if they have to admit it, they have to pay out for it. And so who's left actually minding the ship of safety? Nobody, not the companies and not our federal government.
Right, 100%. I did an interview, one of my early podcasts here. We did an interview. Can you hear me?
Okay, I hear you now.
So one of my early podcasts, I interviewed a detective, this Detective Jenny, in one of my early episodes of my podcast, and she would investigate SIDS cases, okay, on the special forces. And she was basically appointed to, pediatric homicide. And she would say that there was a direct correlation between these SIDS cases and vaccinations. And so she'd put in the police report that these kids had a vaccine. And then she would see the autopsy report, and they wouldn't even mention anything on the records, anything about a vaccine. And so she'd bring it to the attention. And so she was very much pro-vaccine to the start of this. And then at the end of it, she was completely, devastated just by the information that she was finding. I mean, her job as a detective is to leave no stone unturned. And so she was finding that there was a direct correlation here. But in your opinion, do you think that we should eradicate the Vaccine Compensation Act of '86?
I think we should get the government completely out of the business of vaccines. So meaning not just repeal the 1986 Act, but I mean get the government out of it entirely.
I agree.
Just let these pharmaceutical companies stand behind their own product and let the normal market forces work. You have drugs that are given to very small groups of people, meaning the companies are not, pharma companies aren't making a lot of money because they can only, it's just limited market. That cause serious harm, right? But yet they can make a profit on those, but they can't make a profit on a product given to millions of children every year. They can't make those safe enough to actually turn a profit. But all they would really have to do to avoid most lawsuits is make them as safe as technologically feasible. They would avoid design defect claims. And if they disclose all the risks, they'd avoid failure to warn claims. So those are the two primary ways you hold a company accountable for a drug injury, and you would do for a vaccine injury. Why can't they just do those two things? Either they don't want to tell you what the real risks are, or they don't want to make them safer because they don't want to spend the money to retool and do it. So either way, it's disturbing.
To me, it's very disturbing. It's an evil industry. I mean, the children here are, being maimed or injured. I mean, look at what I always say about, what seeds are to the farmer to bring a crop. I firmly believe vaccines are to Big Pharma to bring disease, because this industry doesn't profit when we are well. They profit when we are sick. And, going to the Henry Ford study, I think that was very wise because, obviously William Thompson has stated that the data has been tailored, the data has been compromised. So where do we turn when the data, I should say, our so-called peer-reviewed articles and the studies have been tailored to show desired outcomes? Where do we turn? We go to clinical data. And that's what you guys do with the Henry Ford. Right? And the data has shown that the unvaccinated, there's a clear contrast between the unvaccinated versus vaccinated. And it's comical to me because, you have people like, Paul Thomas and these people say it's unethical to study vaccinated versus unvaccinated because the unvaccinated won't get these precious vaccines. And to me, it's just comical. So can you speak on that for a minute?
Sure. Henry Ford wasn't a clinical trial. It wasn't a prospective study. It was a retrospective study. And it was, which was, the type of study you need to do when you compare vaccinated versus unvaccinated, because the clinical trials for vaccines have already been done, right? They did them pre-licensure to get them licensed. And when you look at those clinical trials, there's not a single clinical trial for a routine injected childhood vaccine that validated its safety before licensure. Not a single one. Just look at chapter 10 of my book, Vaccines Amen, and I go through every single childhood vaccine clinical trial, all with the FDA sources. And what you will find is that not a single one was licensed based on a placebo control group. So if you don't have a placebo control group, what are you comparing it against? And even if you have a placebo control group, meaning with a real baseline of safety, okay, then you need to review safety long enough. A lot of these vaccines reviewed safety after injection. A lot of these clinical trials reviewed safety after injection for often days or weeks. That's ridiculous when you give a product to a baby. Recombavax HB, given to a newborn baby, a hepatitis B vaccine, reviewed safety, monitored safety for 5 days after its injection in its clinical trial. 5 days. So even if it had a placebo control group, it'd have been useless. And then the third thing it needs to have is enough kids in the trial, meaning so you can detect any issues, meaning it needs to be properly powered. That same trial I just told you about had 147 kids. So even if it was placebo controlled, even if it was long-term, with 147 kids, that's not big enough to detect any safety issues to statistical significance to rule them out or determine it does cause those harms. It's a useless trial for safety. Most trials for child vaccines were useless in exactly that same way. Don't take my word for it. It's all right there on the FDA website. For the one I just described, Recombavax HB, you can just go pull up the package insert to anybody sitting at home. Go to section 6.1, which summarizes the clinical trial relied upon to license it. You can read exactly what I just said. 5 days of safety monitoring after injection, 147 kids. Now, since we didn't validate the safety of these products before they were licensed, and that is, it is not a seriously debatable point, because anybody wants to debate me, I'm happy to go on live TV with them. Any scientist, any vaccinologist, immunologist, I have FDA data and all you have is titles, okay? So I should win.
Bingo.
Second is, so what are you left with? After licensure, they say the only thing ethical to do is you can use existing data. You can't leave a kid unvaccinated, but if let's say you have a database of 1 million people in a healthcare system, some are vaccinated, some are not, well, then you can compare those. There's nothing unethical with that. It already exists. So for example, Dr. Tony Mawson, who was an epidemiologist at the University of Jacksonville School of Public Health, he did a pilot study comparing homeschool children. It was small. It was, based on surveys, but it looked at vaccinated to unvaccinated and found that the vaccinated kids had 4 or 5, 6 times the rates of all kinds of chronic diseases. In fact, one of the things he found was, I thought it was an outstanding finding, meaning not that it was good, but that it really stuck out. Neonates that were vaccinated, 32% ended up with a neurodevelopmental disorder. 0% of the unvaccinated, of the neonates, ended up with a neurodevelopmental disorder. That is an incredible differential. He then 100%. Went on to actually getting access to the Medicaid data in Florida, where he had 50,000 kids that he was able to look at their data. That's a big cohort. And he found a statistically significant increased rate of neurodevelopmental issues amongst the vaccinated population compared to the unvaccinated. Others have done this. There's a Paul Thomas, so you mentioned, has a clinic in the United States, pediatrician for 30 years, had children in his practice vaccinated, unvaccinated. And when he compared them based on the medical records in his practice, he found that the vaccinated kids had multiple times the rate, again, of various neurological, neurodevelopmental, immune-related disorders of various kinds. These studies out there that have looked at this and been published, they're consistent and they're showing the same harms. And if those who are proponents of vaccines wanted to just shut the anti-vaxxers up, they just do the same study and show that, no, there's no difference, or the vaccinated kids are healthier. No doubt they've tried, in my mind. They can't seem to make it look that way. So there's nothing to publish.
Right. And I might have misspoke. I earlier I said Paul Thomas was saying that it's unethical to give, to have the unvaccinated versus vaccinated study. I was referring to Paul Offit.
Oh, no. Well, Paul Thomas probably repeated that, obviously, but not in the context of, but I mean, yeah. So, but you don't need it. You don't need to do a prospective clinical trial comparing vaccine and unvaccinated. It would be a good study. I don't personally, there's a lot of medical ethics literature out there that would say that it's unethical to have a product on the market that you haven't properly trialed to begin with. That's unethical.
Right.
How do you
100%.
remedy that unethical? You do a proper trial. There's a lot of literature that talks about that when it comes to drug products. Doesn't seem to cross over to vaccines for some reason.
Right. But I do think the tides are turning. People are waking up to this, and I think the soil for truth is rich right now. But, I wanted to ask you from your perspective, because obviously 6.1, if you look at every package insert, there's a long list of adverse reactions. I mean, anywhere from MS to encephalitis to death to neuralgia, hyperesthesia, all these different things. And I've been collecting vaccine inserts for 2 decades. In the court systems, and I want to know in your experience, if let's say Hannah Polling, are you familiar with the Hannah Polling case? So they labeled, obviously they said autism like, and in the court systems, in the vaccine courts, like they really discourage, in the time of a settlement or recovery, they always say, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't call it autism, but we can call it encephalitis. And I wonder how many encephalitis cases are technically diagnosed at the same time as autism.
Oh, so if so encephalitis, meaning brain swelling, or encephalopathy, meaning brain damage, if your medical records show encephalitis or encephalopathy with all kinds of sequelae from a vaccination, as long as it wasn't called autism, which is really a psychiatric diagnosis, DSM-5 diagnosis,
Right, behavior,
you can get compensated in the vaccine compensation program potentially, right? But you can't call it autism. There's actually a law review article out of, I believe it was published in the Pace Law Review. It was done by a team at New York NYU Law School, prestigious law school. And what they did is they went and reviewed a number of a series of awards in the vaccination compensation program. And what they found was, yes, they were awarding compensation for, an infant or a child that had encephalopathy, meaning brain damage from vaccines. And they'll call it anything, as long as they don't use the A word. But really, when you look underneath the hood, the kid had autism, right? Because what is autism? Autism is a diagnosis where you meet, 3 criteria based on behavior, right? Not a blood test, not any kind of physiological
urine scan, right?
Right. It is repetitive behaviors, reduced socialization, right? And
Eye
so
contact.
if you meet those criteria, you get the diagnosis. Now, if you have lead poisoning, okay, a child has lead poisoning and they end up with those 3 criteria, what the law says, well, the child has lead poisoning because the etiology. So you say lead poisoning, and maybe as might get an autism diagnosis, but they'll call it kid has lead poisoning, right? But if they don't know what the cause is, they don't start with, well, he's lead poisoning and that caused harm and now has, autism-like features or features autism or has an ASD diagnosis. They'll just say, if they don't know, it's ASD. So really ASD in a way is a label for something. It's, yes, they meet these behavioral criteria, but we don't know what causes it. But to your point, yes, Hannah Polling is a child it sounds like maybe your audience knows this already, who developed autism after getting a whole slew of vaccines. The difference is that her dad was one of the leading autism researchers in the whole country at Krieger, and him and his colleagues even published a peer-reviewed article explaining how the vaccination resulted in her autism. And so HHS, in her instance, they had no choice. I mean, they settled with that family for $20 million of life care, and they sealed the decision. So the world would never know, except the world does know because it was leaked. So, can vaccines cause autism? Did in Hannah Polling's case, didn't it?
Right. I view these vaccinations worse than frontal lobotomies. I mean, we did frontal lobotomies all the way to the 1950s. And if you look at how the nervous system, the most vulnerable time for the nervous system is in the first 2 years of life. I mean, the first year of life, the baby's nervous system is developing at a rapid rate. We call it exuberant neural synaptogenesis. It doubles in size that first year of life, but yet we want to throw in all these vaccines that have 0 nutrients in them. In my opinion, there's 0 benefit to any vaccine. I don't know what your take is. Do you believe that there is a safe vaccine, Aaron?
I mean, I think that all vaccines are really, they're just products, right? So is there such thing as a safe car? I mean, I don't, nobody would, that's the thing. Nobody talks that way about any other product, you just like, no, well, obviously you can make them safer or not safer. When it comes to vaccines, Do I think that there are some things that vaccines can do that could potentially be viewed as a benefit? I mean, measles vaccine can prevent transmission of measles for some in most people, many people for some duration of time. Is that a benefit? You could view it that way, but that's not where the analysis needs to end, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. Is that
Right.
that is what you will often hear. Well, it'll save a kid. Well, maybe okay, but what is the overall impact public health? Isn't this about public health? So, like with
Yes.
measles, for just as a random example, about 400 people a year died of measles in the U.S. in the late 50s, early 60s before the first measles vaccine in 1963. The measles mortality rate had declined by over 98% between 1900 and the introduction of the vaccine. So obviously, I know one thing that didn't cause that reduction, the vaccine, because there was none, okay? That decline was likely going to continue because pockets of this country were still like a developed world where children can die of any infection back in the late 50s, early 60s. All right. So how much of that continued decline had to do with the vaccine? I don't know. Maybe part of it, you could certainly argue, all right, because it does stop transmission. But studies that compare people that have gotten measles, not the vaccine, measles, to those who haven't, have found that those who've had measles versus those who don't die at a far less statistically significant rate of heart disease, of various
100%.
cancers, of
Yes,
Hodgkin's
the
lymphoma,
cancer.
non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, ovarian cancer, 20% reduction in mortality just from cardiovascular deaths, statistically significant on a 100,000 person Japanese study. Heart disease kills 800,000 Americans a year.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start doing the math, well, if eliminating measles caused even a 1% increase in deaths from heart disease and even 1% increase in some of these cancers, you are way upside down in your public health benefit. Like, you are way upside down. And there, and maybe there's a reason that measles never went away, like so many pathogens come and go throughout history. Maybe there was an ecological reason of why humans had developed a relationship with measles. The point is that we have to look at it objectively. We have to really look at it holistically. And that's just not the way the conversation happens. So when you ask me, is there a vaccine that's safe? My answer is, you have to, if you want to know, I think you have to ask yourself, not is it safe, but what is the public health benefit overall for every product? But even then, by the way, I got to say this, even then, even if you come out and you say, yes, the benefits outweigh the risk, that doesn't mean you should mandate it.
Right.
Persuade
That's
people on the
100%.
merits, because that's what civil individuals' rights are about.
Right, 100%. If we ever in confusion, ever in doubt, err on the side of liberty and freedom. And that's what this to me is about, with the digital ID coming, the ACIP in 2019 stating that they can't force vaccinate, but they can force compliance. I think that they're going to try to leverage this and say that the unvaccinated are a threat to public health. So that question, is this good for public health? I think, a lot of people have a perverted view of this herd immunity and whatnot. And I always argue, I have rabbits that are thriving. I live in the woods. Okay. I live in the middle. I got 10 acres in the woods, and I'm surrounded by, all country ground. I got coyotes that are absolutely thriving. In fact, our county considers them a pest. They said, just go ahead and shoot them. You don't need a permit. Okay. I have squirrels that are going crazy, I live in a log cabin, and they love to climb on my roof, wake me up at night. My point is, these animals are thriving, and they don't receive any vaccines. How? And so this whole herd immunity is a herd mentality, right? So to me, I was never vaccinated as a kid. My siblings were never vaccinated. I never vaccinated my kids, and we're all thriving, we're healthy. I got chickenpox as a kid, and I'm still here, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the measles correlation with cancer. There is a direct correlation there. And also, I want to talk about the chickenpox. The number 2 cancer in children is like a glioma, brain cancer. And the glioma is part of the chickenpox family. And so, and I argue, like, look at the rise in glioma since the chickenpox vaccine came about. It's like, oh, we're not getting chickenpox, which is a benign issue. Okay. And, maybe it can be a serious thing, just like whooping cough in the first couple months of life. After that, it's a benign issue. And look at the rising gliomas at post-vaccination of the chickenpox vaccine. So I think there is a rise in that. And so, again, this is why I always say what the seeds are to the farmer to bring a crop, vaccines are to Big Pharma to bring disease. And they might prevent you from getting measles and prevent you from different things, but they cause a whole array of different issues. Allergies, ADHD, neurological developmental disorders, delays, demyelination. I mean, and I know that you know this more than anyone, but I want to talk to you because, you know, I have a lot to talk to you about, and I know we could talk all day, but I want to get to your book, and I want to talk on the vaccine side of things, and the religion side of things, and the spiritual side of things on this. But I want to talk to get your insight on the VAERS, because, you know, people like Peter Hotez, he said that the VAERS is an inaccurate system, which I think there might be some truth to that, but it's a felony. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's a felony to falsify a report in the VAERS.
You're not supposed to submit false information to the federal government, but here's the problem with Dr. Hotez. I use that loosely. Point is that 70%, you know, depending on what data you look at, of VAERS reports are submitted by doctors and pharma companies and health agencies. Are they falsifying data? So is there nobody to trust? Meaning, right. You know, they love to say, well, you know, anybody can submit a VAERS report. You know, have you ever looked at a VAERS report? Have you ever seen the amount of detail you need to complete a VAERS report? They don't make submitting that thing easy. It requires a lot of work. The fact, frankly, that any doctor submit ones is amazing to me, because they're busy and they are not easy. And, the most disturbing part is that AHRQ, an agency in the federal government, paid Harvard Pilgrim, and Harvard Medical School scientists to create a way to automate the VAERS reporting, so that if you had an issue, because everything's digitized, why do we have people, you know what I mean? Like, why don't we just make them do it with crayon? Why doesn't it just the computer automatically catch? Child goes in and gets vaccines, within 12 hours has a grand mal seizure. Let's automatically report that to VAERS. Why does a doctor need to go and actually spend an hour filling out a report for that, other than to dissuade the submission of those reports? I mean, that is the way it's designed. Harvard Pilgrim automated it, and they captured something like, 300,000 adverse events, and they created a system that could automatically then transmit it into VAERS. And as they explained, the CDC stopped communicating with them, would not finish the project to link what Harvard Medical School scientists working at Harvard program had designed to link with the CDC. And to this day, they automate in every state, capturing every kid who gets a vaccine. They have centralized database. They automate nationally the distribution of vaccines. They automate tracking vaccines. They've automated every single aspect of this entire system. They know down to the 0.1%, in developing countries in the middle of nowhere, their vaccination rate, because they've automated that. But in America, you can't automate VAERS? Come on. It's purposefully trying to do it. But that point doesn't even stick, because that's not where most VAERS reports come from.
That's exactly right. It's a very well said point. And I think, to me, we need to automate that system. I've heard that the only reports that are ever filed are the most determined people, because it takes forever. It's a very tedious process. I mean, it's a nightmare, and it's by design, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll say this, and they're like, well, it doesn't prove causation. Let me tell you something. I don't think doctors almost ever submit a VAERS report unless they are like, yeah, I think that was caused by a vaccine, because otherwise they're not motivated to do it. I've never met a doctor that submitted a VAERS report who did it because they were like, well, maybe it's related. No, they do it when they really think it's related. That's one. 100%. Two, if you've automated it, then you would have a denominator. You would know the population size from which you were getting reports. So you could say, okay, from this one hospital that had 100,000 patients in this period of time, we had 50 reports of X. Now you can get a rate. And they don't want to automate it because of exactly that. They don't want you to be able to get a rate. The only way they want rates to ever be calculated are in their secret systems, like the vaccine safety data link that they have to hide from the public. They never want to let you have longitudinal actual safety data. Even right now, even with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Secretary of HHS, even as we talk, getting their hands on that data. The vaccine safety data link participants don't want to participate now.
Yeah.
Why?
If these vaccines are so safe, then why shouldn't there be transparency? Shouldn't they just bring it to the forefront? Look how safe they are. But they're hiding it, and I think that just raises more suspicion. And I think people that are on the fence here, we need to wake up and realize that we are long past the debate whether these vaccines are safe and effective. We are at a time where we need attorneys like yourself to go after these people for crimes against humanity. In my opinion, it's evil, and to me, it's really what fuels my fire here. Just because the unvaccinated are healthier, and I can't tell you how many stories, and I know I can't even imagine how many people have reached out to you as well, but there's so many people that I've talked to. I mean, thousands of people I've talked to in the past years, just heartbreaking story after story, and the ocean of injuries that these poor people are being gaslit, and they just are ridiculed from the medical establishment. My dad's best friend, he passed away here last year, but his grandson, when he was 5 or 6, he got his kindergarten shots. And the day, about an hour after, or hour or 2 hours after the shot, he started feeling some weakness in his legs. It didn't feel right. And he basically, they rushed him to the ER. And the doctor said, "Oh, he'll be fine. Just go home, put him to bed. He'll be fine by the morning." Well, the mom just felt like she needed to check on him. It was 2 a.m, and she found him on the floor trying to scream and laying in a puddle of his own urine. And he had to get air flighted to Omaha, Nebraska. And they diagnosed him with Guillain-Barré. And basically, my dad's best friend, he was a very large blue collar man. He went past the front desk of the MB's office and opened the door of his office and said, "You are going to sign this document and admit that it was the vaccine," because there was no other thing. I mean, and so stories like that, it's just, they really move you, and it's hard to debunk those stories. And, and I don't know if they ever filed a VAERS report or not in that story, but I don't think they ever went to the court system. But how many stories like that get brushed under the radar that don't make it to the masses, that don't make it to the forefront of the people?
Almost all. Because most of those folks, they're not looking for publicity. They just want to live their lives. They're not looking for this. They just were going along with what they were told to do, get a vaccine. And then after they get injured and they have a devastating reaction, and the tens of thousands of those folks have contacted our firm, most of whom we can't help because either they've, for various reasons, including because they've oftentimes they don't recognize it until it's too late to file a claim. It's the type of claim that we know the vaccine court will never accept no matter what, for policy reasons. The medical literature is not properly developed, but we can go down the list. But with COVID vaccine, that's a whole different animal. These folks, as you just said, now they've got an injury, their kid themselves. And then if they go back to the medical community, to the same folks who told them this product was safe, and they seek treatment and they say it's from a vaccine, unfortunately, all too often, they then get insult on top of the injury. And, they're not, they just want, most parents, they just want to take care of their family. They're not looking for any publicity. They're not looking, they don't post it on the internet. They don't talk about it. It's just, they suffer in silence.
100%. And this is why I support you and your work. We need to band together in this. You came out with a book called Vaccines, Amen. I heard you talk about it. And I think one of the most profound things I heard you say was that nobody talks about other things like, I believe in vaccines. You made that statement. And I thought that was very profound. And the point you made, it's almost a religion at that point. I mean, the book is the religion of vaccines. And I'm actually in I'm in the middle of a book as well, a very similar book. But the book you're talking about, that Vaccines, Amen, it's as if these vaccines are religion. And there's a stronghold here. And I think this is why there's a spiritual component around this whole thing. Because, you look at in 2019, the Vaccine Summit, they took out "In God We Trust." They put "In Vaccines We Trust." I saw things going around that if Jesus would wear a mask or Jesus would be vaccinated, and these different things. And during the COVID pandemic, you had, the Jesus statue in South America lit up, and they put "Vaccine Saves." So I want to know where you stand in your convictions around this. What prompted you to write the book? and just give us some insight on this.
Sure. What prompted me to write the book is this. Change in legislatures, how in Congress and in state legislatures and in courts often follow the change in the way the public views an issue. It's what I call cultural cognition. So gay marriage, whether you agree with it or not, was never going to be a constitutional right affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court in the 1800s. There was no Supreme Court that was going to affirm that as a constitutional right. Neither in the 1910s or 20s or 30s. What changed? What changed, again, irrespective of one's views on the issue, is that it was the cultural cognition. It was the public's view about the issue until that percolated up, and the Supreme Court judges and the judges in the federal judiciary ended up agreeing, yes, gay marriage is a constitutional right under the U.S. Constitution. Constitution did not change. Okay? What changes the people's views on the issue. And so similarly, when it comes to these products, we need to get to a point in this country where a sufficient percentage of folks stop viewing these products as items of worship beyond question and start thinking about them and seeing them as products. Nobody calls me anti-car or pro-car or, or cars are good or cars are bad. Nobody says that. I don't think sheetrock's good or bad, and I don't think sheetrock's, I'm not pro or anti-sheetrock, okay?
Right.
But when it comes to vaccines, that is the language in which one speaks. Oh, you don't believe in vaccines?
Right.
People say that all the time. I hear that all the time. But nobody ever says about other things. It's because so much of what you hear about vaccines, they are based on belief. They're believed through repetition, dogma, okay? And so how do we get through that? It's not I'm not trying to persuade you that vaccines are good or bad in my book. I'm not trying to persuade you to like them or not like them, or even to make any decision on whether to take them. I'm trying to show that the way that people think about them, the way that is particularly the vaccinologists, public health officials, you go down the list, talk about them, the way that they even think about them is not based on science. It's not based on data. It's not based on critical thinking. It's not based on public health. It's based on dogma, belief, and repetition. And when you see it and you understand it, you don't have to walk away with feelings. In fact, that's what I want you to walk away with, the exact opposite. I think you walk away starting to think about the products. So just like when you go in and you're like, should I get this car for my daughter? What's the crash test rating? I bet half the parents at least do that. Like, well, how safe is it? You think about that. I want to put my child, my 17-year-old, child is going to start driving. I want to know how safe, what would happen if this thing got into a crash? And you're not going to do that based on belief or dogma. You're going to do it based on like the crash test report. You might,
right.
And the same thing with vaccines. I'm not saying become a vaccinologist. I'm not saying become some expert, but it doesn't take more than just like looking at a crash test report takes, a minute online. It doesn't take more than a minute to read section 6.1 of a package insert and say, okay, well, you know what? What was the clinical trial? What was the crash test study they did on this product before they unleashed it on every baby? Did they look at safety for a few years? I mean, it's a baby. You don't know whether they're going to have an issue until 5-6 years for various stuff. How long did they look at safety? Was it years? Was it months only? Oh my God. Was it days? Right? So, and again, that is not to make you go, I don't want it. It's to make you go, I need to think about it, start asking questions, and get everybody else around you that to start asking questions. And and you can get that from my book. You can also get it by reading some of the Get Informed information on ICANDecide.org's website. ICAN is the nonprofit that supports a lot of the vaccine policy work my law firm does. It's the type of legal work there's no real money in, so ICAN supports it, like restoring exemptions, fighting against mandates, and so forth. So I wrote the book in the hope of getting us, that everybody that reads it, once you know, you can't no longer go back, right? So when I confront doctors about these products a lot of times who know nothing about them, which is most doctors, and I present a piece of data or evidence, If all they have is their dogma belief, what do they react with? Emotion, anger, pejoratives, name calling. Why? Because they can't draw on their intellect. They don't have the knowledge to respond to it. So that's what they draw upon. I want to arm as many people as possible to have at least the baseline of knowledge that I have about these products so they too can engage in it intellectually and not emotionally and without ad hominem, without name calling and so forth, which is the way it should be. Our children are far too precious to sacrifice in the name of any religion or dogma or belief, okay? No child should be sacrificed on the altar of vaccines. We can save all children. We can save children from harm from infectious disease and from harms from these products. We can do both, but there's zero attempt to really save them from the harm from these products. And we're never going to get there until people start seeing these things as products again. So that's why I wrote the book, and I hope that everybody who reads it leaves with that kind of understanding. And I've made it fun. I don't want to make the book sound boring. I've gone through epic legal battles around vaccines. I've sued them out the military across the country, and and so forth. And so the book goes through, and I try to make it engaging and interesting along the way.
Fantastic. Well said, Aaron. Where can people find you, and where can people get the book?
Well, the book's available on Amazon. You can find, I'm also on Twitter, Aaron Siri, SG, and all my socials and everything are at aaronsiriofficial.com. And you can also, if you like the vaccine policy work that my firm does, support an organization called ICAN, which is at icandecide.org. Yeah.
Awesome, Aaron. God bless you, friend. We'll be praying for your work. Again, I feel like this is all spiritual battle. Vaccines, amen. Get the book, support Aaron, share this podcast. Thank you for all your supporters out here. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And God bless.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor,
Please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?